Thank you for coming here. It's a real delight to be able to host this event. My name is David Simon. I'm the director of the Genocide Studies program here at Yale. And the event today is a book talk. See it right above my, over my shoulder. A book talk with Charlie Scheidt and Kat Rohrer, who are the authors of Inheritance, Love, Loss, and the Legacy of the Holocaust, a book that is, I think, I would say equal parts loving and searing, but more loving than searing is in its effect. And I'll say a few words about it here. I am joined here by Charlie Scheidt, of course, the author, and shortly, oh, there she is on the screen over my shoulder is Kat Rohrer. She was hoping to be here in person. The original plan was that she would be here in person, but she, for family reasons, is in Austria, if I understand that correctly.
Right.
So it's late in the afternoon, middle of the evening. I know. I was trying to be generous in Austria, and so we're really grateful that the Kat is able to join us. The format here is that I'm planning to. I'd like to share some of my reflections about the book, if that's okay, and then ask Charlie a few questions, Charlie and Kat, a few questions to start the conversation. Now, the book was released about 2 weeks ago, right, officially? So I'm guessing not many of you in the audience have had a chance to read it yet. There are copies for sale out in the lobby behind the doors, and we will have a short reception around 5:30 or so. Chance to talk to Charlie, buy a copy of the book, I recommend. And am I allowed to say that? I'm not sure. It's like, a nonprofit status here. Is it?
I'll take the plug.
Okay, good. But in between my questions, our conversation, or after our conversation, I'm hoping that even without having read the book, you will have enough of a sense of what's going on here, enough issues that resonate with you all, that you should be absolutely feel free to ask some questions of Charlie and Kat as well. So without further ado, let me dive in and just sort of say a few words about the book, which I was lucky enough to have a chance to read an advance copy. So if it changed much from the proofs that you sent me to the final copy, some of this may be null and void. But as I said, it's a book about, and I'll take the liberty of describing it a little bit, the organization of the book, since it's probably new to most people here. The book begins chronologically with, in some ways, the book begins with a story about Charlie's father, but really the essence of what's happening in this book begins with Charlie's mother, as she is late in life and ill on her deathbed, essentially, somewhat casually revealing that there's a trove of letters and documents in a what's the furniture? Armoire, thank you, in the same room. And she said really nothing more of it. And I imagine Charlie was, preoccupied with care for his mother at in those last few weeks there. And I'm going to ask Charlie about this in a second. I won't break my introduction to do so now. But it is, Charlie does go and find those the letters in the armoire, the documents in the armoire, is connected with Kat, and the two of them start diligently researching the family history that is encapsulated in those letters, mostly throughout Europe, but also to some extent in America. The story is largely then a reconstruction of what Charlie's family went through. This is his parents, his uncle, aunt and uncle, their cousins, one cousin, I guess.
It's actually two families, both my mother's family and my father's family, two very different families, German Jewish families, two very different families.
Yes, yes. And it is that German Jewish experience in particular that as you get, as Charlie and Kat are sort of unpacking, sorting out as almost detectives or sleuths of some sort, what their family went, what Charlie's families went through during the Holocaust. It's one gets this sort of sense of not being there in the Holocaust, but of maybe following the news as it's a certain type of history of being witness to the events as they unravel, as history unravels, literally, figuratively, without actually being there. And it's beautifully written so that it's told through the eyes of various relatives of Charlie's. And there's a fair portion that does take place in the US as well after the war that I think is very important about the book, because the book is, in some sense, it's fundamentally about history, but also about family and how a family is shaped by history. I want to read one quote, which gives, I think, some sense of where I think Charlie is coming from, or it's in the book, so it's in your words. So I think I'm right on this particular issue.
I'm a little nervous.
No, Charlie writes, "I delved into my family's story for my own sake and for the benefit of my sons and their children. I did it for my parents and for Max and Erna," in the book you'll know who Max and Erna are, "and for Lilo and Eileen. I did it because nothing is more important than giving meaning to loss and suffering. Without that, the oppressors own the story." I think that is, fundamentally a lot of, that's such an important point. Why do we write? Why do we read? Why do we study? Why do we teach these issues? A lot of it has to do with reclaiming the story, reclaiming the history for families, for ourselves, but from oppressors. Along the way, I was just moved by how much Charlie and Kat find humanity in this story, and understanding the struggles and the torment, but also the successes, and most of all, the choices that people make. It absolutely humanizes these survivors and victims of the Holocaust in a way that, well, certainly watching testimony does, and the Fortunoff Archive, we're grateful to have their support for this event. But you get a sort of different, I would say more dimensions, but different dimensions in this telling of it, and it enables us to see both the specific history of the people being described and the shared history of, to some extent, all of us. It's also, I think, important as a way of understanding, this is my last point, I think, before I'll get to questions, but for understanding the mechanism of survival and of not surviving during the Holocaust, that so often, and again, this is also part of reclaiming the story from oppressors, understanding the choices that were made, the efforts and the opportunities that people had, and what it meant to take advantage of those opportunities, who came along, who was left behind, how much focus there was on reaching out to those who were left behind, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. and that for me was instructive. Instructive because it's it's something that is not just about the Holocaust. I hope I didn't find too much resonance in our own times, but at times I did. And again, that's not I don't want to overstate that parallel, but just to say, the story starts in 1933, essentially 1933, the very first scene of the story. And it is when Charlie's father runs out the back door of his factory as the Gestapo at that point is coming in the front door to round him up as a political opponent. And that, obviously that's very frightening, but it's also very real. And to know that it is the real life story of your father, someone who is right there for you, your whole life until he passed is stunning and moving. So
a turning point in this evolution was my mother died in 1988. It was 20 years later that I went for the first time to Frankfurt, which is the city my parents were from. They had never returned, and they had never taken me there. And I had flown into Frankfurt countless times in order to go to a trade fair in Cologne, but I had never gone into the city. And I was invited by a historian, a German historian, and she took me on a tour, and we happened to go to where my father's where his office was. And I looked out the window and I happened to see railroad tracks. And the story was that I had grown up with that the Gestapo or the brown shirts, whatever they were called, in March 1933. They came in the front door, he fled out the back door and essentially took the first train out of Germany and ended up in Paris and started a new business in Paris. But it was the sight of those railroad tracks that was the final straw for me to say, I've got to deal with this trove of documents and letters that my mother had bequeathed to me and called to my attention practically at the last moment. She made that effort to tell me about it, that it was hidden behind a bunch of junk in the armoire, and that undoubtedly all the junk was going to be thrown away, but I should know it's there, and when I have a chance, take a look at it and decide what to do with it. I took 20 years of looking, not looking, and there's something, I don't know, is any other 2G members, second generation, third generation? And Kat is third generation. Oh, she's up there too. Oh yeah, we're surrounded by Kat.
All three Cats.
Right. Kat is third generation. I'm second generation. And there's something about living in that past, wanting to spend your time. And I've now spent, well, Kat and I argue whether it's a dozen years or 15 years that we've spent on this project. And there's something about living in that past, your own family's past, which, at least for myself, you want to spend the time, but you don't want to spend the time. You have a life to lead. I spent 20 years, running a business, raising a family, living in the present. But there came a point for me that I wanted to delve into it. But what I want to emphasize is I think for whether it's the Holocaust or other atrocities that that second generation, third generation grow up with, you grow up with some of the stories and the scars, and you there's a conflict whether you really want to spend your time and your life examining and finding out all the details or not. So that's a little bit more color on the on, and I would just also emphasize the role of the letters that I inherited because they are first person. They were not written for posterity. They were not written for me or the reader. They were just life as lived. And I'm just really lucky that my mother saved them and that I can create their lives and their story from these original documents. And that's really the core of the book is some of those stories.
Charlie, I'm going to, in a way, you just answered what was going to be my first question about, how did those letters inspire you to write? But I know it's off our script, as it were, but I wanted to ask maybe quickly, why do you think do you think your mother, you must be doing what your mother wanted you to do. I mean, she had those letters. She said, throw them away if you want. And yet she kept them for all that reason. And she told you about them. Do you think that was her intent to have you go back and do what you did?
I've often thought about that. I'll say that my father, I think, would never have understood why are you living in the past? Why do you want to spend your time? Why do you want to unearth these stories and what happened? My mother, on the other hand, now my mother outlived my father by close to 20 years. So maybe time was a factor, but my mother, I think, intentionally, you know, used her energy, which was failing at that time in her life, but she used the energy to tell me and wanted to tell me about it so that I would have I would know it's there and have the opportunity to tell the story and figure out what really happened.
Thank you, Charlie. I want to bring Kat into this since she's tuning in from so far away, and actually, Kat, Kat, you are sort of the leading the research charge and helping Charlie get focused. But I'm wondering, and Charlie talks a little bit. We both he's talked today, but also in the book about approaching the project, and in mentioning how lucky he was to find you as doing a video project, sort of as happenstance almost, and that he realized that you would have some expertise in certain elements that would be required for the project. But I'm wondering if you could sort of say what your thought process was in when you met Charlie and Charlie told you about these letters and this sort of opportunity to investigate family history and European history at the same time.
Yeah. So it was 15 years. I need to put the record straight. Charlie wants it to be 12, but it really was 15 years. I think it was really coincidental that we met, and I think it was meant to be. I was always interested in my family history, which is very, very different. It's from the other side. My grandfather was a Nazi, a Nazi that was a true believer and was a member of the party when the party was still illegal in Austria. And I grew up with that story. I mean, he was killed in the war, 3 months after my mother was born. So nobody ever, met him. My mother didn't meet him. I didn't meet him. My grandmother passed away when I was 3. So I had very little contact with that generation, but I was always fascinated. Um, the effect this one man's choice, unfortunate choice, had on my family. And it wasn't unlike in Charlie's instance, where there was a lot of silence around the history. There really wasn't in my family. I grew up knowing the history also in part because my grandmother's sister, who ended up being like my grandmother, actually was married to a Jew and fled to Australia. So there was always this interest in this history because of my family history. And I think um, us meeting was so fortuitous because I could bring something to the project that Charlie needed. And we share, we're both very stubborn, we share tenacity, and we share not taking no for an answer. And that ended up being a really good, complementary teamwork. And I love historic research and archives. It's a little bit like detective work. So that's where I really enjoyed doing.
Thank you, Kat. Sorry, I was fiddling around with the volume there for a little bit. I think you were a little relatively quiet in this room. No fault of your own, just in terms of our own audio. I think I've got it a little bit louder, now. I wanted to ask a couple questions about sort of your relationship to history, really to both of you. The question that I had sort of jotted down before was about from Charlie's perspective, as a Jewish descendant of Holocaust survivors, returning to Europe must have a sort of certain one steels oneself for the horrors. But you're coming from America, where there are the Holocaust is certainly remembered, but there are no camps here. There are no like lieux de mémoire. I'm saying that right. The same way that there are in Europe, and so that there's almost a ritual. In some cases, there is a ritualistic quality to visiting a concentration camp, honoring the deceased, the relatives, for Americans and American Jews in particular. And then for you as a European, it's home. That these are towns and villages that mean Holocaust sites for Americans are places where you turn right in Europe. I think that's a bad phrase. Turn left. Forks in the road. All loaded phrases. But I wonder, what is it like for you from the European's perspective, to go through this journey and to kind of, are you confronting ghosts of the past, not your past, but of your, there's some allusion early in the book to the towns in Austria that are still very,
Right.
right leading. Yeah. And
Um,
does that feel like a legacy in some ways? Are the dots connected?
I think it's very listen, I mean, if I walk around in Vienna, do I see the Holocaust everywhere? No, because I grew up here and I have my own memories. When I walk around in Berlin, it's a very different story, right? For me, the Holocaust is very present in Berlin because I didn't grow up there and I went there as an adult and knowing the history. So it is very, very different of where you go. So I don't think in that sense I had a different experience than Charlie, because when we went to Germany or Holland, I mean Amsterdam or Paris, we were both equal in that journey, right? We were equal in finding out his family history. Very often, also not necessarily only about the Holocaust, but also about Jewish life in smaller towns, Jewish life that all these, some of these Germans who are volunteering are preserving. I mean, we're going to little towns that had little Jewish communities, but have like these beautiful little Jewish cemeteries. And you have these volunteers that are preserving this and showing us around and going into their city archives to help us answer some questions and find documents. So that is very different. We did take a trip to Vienna. Obviously, that was very different for me as well, because then we're looking into. I mean, one of Charlie's aunts lived here in the 20s, so way before the war. But that becomes different. But of course, did my approach or my heritage or whatever you want to call it influence the conversations we had? Absolutely. I mean, I have the benefit of being one generation more removed, so I have a little more distance, and I didn't have a relationship with my grandparents. So it's easier for me to question them in general and their motives. I think it's way harder for people who did grow up with their grandparents and knew them very differently. But for that reason, because I had that distance, I think I was able to push the both of us to look at things that might have been harder otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. And Charlie, a sort of version of that question for you is, as you going to these sites that are both of kind of historical importance, but also, sort of historical importance generally, but also had very specific meaning to your family, for your family, and it was for the latter reason that you were there. What did there had to have been a mix of emotions. Part of it was kind of the intellectual challenge of piecing together the movements of your relatives, and another part of it had to have been sadness and anger. Did you ever find it hard to sort these things out, or maybe just being a well-balanced individual makes it a lot easier, but it's got to be challenging.
I'm not sure about the well balanced, but so going to, for example, finding the gravestone of my grandfather, after whom I was named, in Weissensee. If you've been to Berlin, it's a huge Jewish cemetery that was not destroyed because it was. The idea was that the Jewish civilization would disappear, and that this was going to be like a museum of this disappeared culture. Anyway, so it's this huge cemetery, and Kat had gone earlier and insisted that we take a trip together, and that include the visit to that cemetery and to see the gravestone of my grandfather, who happened to die in Berlin. But being there, I had this sense of time, of how important this man was to my father and to my uncle, and that so many decades, something like 60 or 70 years had gone by, and no family member had visited this grave in all those years, and a sense of roots. So no anger on my part, just a sense of time and the opportunity and the good fortune that this gravestone still existed. One other event, just we went to and by the way, I just want to interject. Kat was being modest. The book would not exist in its present form, and might not exist at all, had we not met and had we not formed a friendship and really collaborated and worked together on creating the book. So just an interjection. I lost my train of thought now.
Yeah, I actually wanted to raise a question related to this, unless you've recovered train of thought. I think one of the more haunting passages in the book for me, if I can read a couple more sentences, is about your Aunt Lilo standing at her daughter, and I hope this is a bit of a spoiler, but we'll proceed. Your Aunt Lilo standing at her daughter Eileen's grave, and finding no solace in the ritual, no solace in the ritual of being there. You write, actually writing about her testimony, which was oral testimony given to in Los Angeles. In her testimony, Lila recalled the emptiness of visiting her daughter's final resting place, saying, "I went a couple of times only to find out she isn't any closer to me there than she is anywhere else." I found that sort of emptiness, description of emptiness, really haunting, and it shook me a little bit to think that I guess it depends what you're in it for. If you're looking for you never knew Eileen, so Eileen wasn't someone that you would have directly missed. But did you ever, I don't know, I feel weird saying, did you ever feel heartrending despair, which is sort of a awkward question to ask, but that emptiness, is that also part of doing this type of?
Speaking for myself, if you want to talk about despair, if you go to a concentration camp, and we went to Bergen-Belsen and we went to Ravensbrück, and if you knew and knew people, knew and loved, like my aunt, who barely survived, both of them, and to walk around and imagine somebody you loved in that horrible place, even though stuff has been torn down and it doesn't look exactly like it did in the 30s or 40s. But that's a very, talk about despair. I'll tell the story. We left Ravensbrück, and Kat and I we're not speaking. We got in the car, hardly said a word to each other. Neither of us could speak. You know, that's how powerful the experience is. Kat knowing my aunt from letters, my knowing my aunt as this loving, wonderful lady. Yeah. So that's painful.
Yeah.
It's not knowing somebody who was there is different from going to our point.
Right.
It's historical. You're one step removed.
Well, let me ask one more question of both of you, and then we'll turn it over to you take some audience questions. And that question is, so a big, vague, general question. Feel free to take it any way you want. But how did working on this project change you? Do you think it changed you? Whether it's some lesson learned or some shift in perspective about yourself, about your past, about your family, about your community.
Do you want me to go first, Charlie?
Sure.
Okay. Funnily enough, while we were doing the book, I was also working on a film because I'm actually a filmmaker per trade, not a historical researcher. And I did a film about young Israelis moving back to Germany and Austria and how their grandparents feel about that move. And making that film and the book really helped me deal with the guilt that I was still feeling, despite never having met my grandfather, despite not having anything to do with it. And kind of making sense of that for me. And also, if you will, out myself in a more public way of saying, this is where I come from. And yes, I'm not proud of it. I'm ashamed of it, but this is what it is. I can't change it. And let's have a conversation about it. And that certainly was part of how that changed and influenced me, particularly thanks to, with Charlie and going on these trips and researching this particular family's history so intimately.
And I would add to that also the possibility and the importance of connections. I mean, it starts with a building of community in the process of doing all this work. I mean, the obvious is the connection between the friendship between Kat and myself, but more broadly, as we were traveling, and we met so many people who were so helpful to us in all the research. Um, on the first day that we traveled together, for example, and I will never forget this. We pushed ourselves. It was I had flown in from New York. I was tired, but we pushed ourselves to go to the school that my cousin had attended, and it was after hours. The kids had left. A teacher leaves. I happen to talk to I accost the teacher and say, "Oh, my cousin went to this school. Could we go inside?" And she said, "Well, there's actually somebody who's done research about Jewish kids who went to this Montessori school." And we met a teacher who's done this research, written a book, and there happened to be also something in that book written by my cousin. And these kind of events kept on happening on our travels. People going out of their way, people taking care of cemeteries all over, volunteers, people helping us on their own time, just to pull this together. So it both changed me in terms of knowing my family history, knowing more about the world in which I grew up, and being able to share that with my kids and my grandkids, but also being able to share that with the world, with others who are interested in what do refugees really go through. And whether you're a refugee after the Holocaust, or a refugee today or 20 years ago from all kinds of atrocities, unfortunately, they're very much with us. And to be able to have the opportunity to write this book, and my hope is that people seeing the story and the lives of refugees from a distance will understand more of what refugees go through today. So to that extent, yes. Yeah. There's change. There's learning, all kinds of learning.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you said that, because as I read it, that was things that struck me the most. In some sense, like, I thought, wow, this is a book about refugees, about what it's like to be refugees. That what it's like to be a refugee, what what it's like to leave everything behind, to look for narrow openings to get to the next place, unsure whether the next place will be better than the last one, or maybe just knowing that you have to leave the last one. So it'll be better, but you don't know how. It's really powerful and moving in that respect. And I think of you as you've been a generous supporter of Holocaust and genocide education. And I thought that adding that refugee element, to that is it's well worth integrating that experience, because where there are atrocities, there are refugees, and it struck me that that's something that needs perhaps more focus within the genocide studies realm. I want to turn to the audience. Like I said, I know. I feel like I'm in my professor mode right now. I don't expect you to have done the reading, but but obviously you have a sense of what the story is about, what Charlie and Kat have accomplished, and if there are sort of questions you might have for them about that, that would be, yeah. And I think we have a microphone. I could, yeah.
Thank you very much. Can you discuss how the two of you met? Was it intentional, accidental? How did it come about? How did you find each other? Did you look specifically for Kat? Can you talk about that? Thank you.
Had I looked for her, I don't think I would have found her. So it was the complete serendipity. We were doing a video about my company. I should just explain. My parents, when they came here, started a food import company. My dad died very suddenly while I was in law school. Long story. Anyway, I spent a lifetime in the food import business, and we were doing a video, and by that point it was around 2008, 2009. I had pretty much decided I wanted to deal with what I had inherited, and that I needed help. German was my first language. German, everybody who came to visit spoke German. Friday night dinners were in, the language was not, yeah, it was German. So I had decided I definitely needed somebody to work with me, because these thousand documents and letters were just overwhelming. And somebody who spoke German. And I happened to know, I'm sorry?
The big armoire to have a
Yeah, and they were a mess. Anyway, and Kat happened to be on that video shoot, and I happened to notice that she translated something for the rest of the team. And a couple of weeks later, I inquired from the guy running it whether would he ask Kat whether she might be interested in working with me on this project. And my good fortune, she would. So that's how our relationship began.
Kat, I wonder, is there anything you would add to that story? Were you surprised when the CEO of the
I was a bit surprised.
Shoot for approached you?
It was a couple months later, and I got this email from the director saying Charlie really wants to get in touch with you, and I couldn't, for the life of me, think of why, not knowing that he had all these documents. And then Charlie said, "I have these letters. Would you take a look at a couple of them and tell me if there's a story?" Well, it was more than a couple. And he really threw me a bit in the deep end, because they were all scanned and they were on CD-ROM, and he just gave me the CD-ROM and said, "Here." And I had to start figuring it out, because I didn't know any of the names. I didn't know any of the people. And I started to make a tree and do some research on my own, just in order to figure out who's talking to who about what. And obviously, the first thing I wanted to do and had to do was tell Charlie about my own family history, because I wanted to be very forthcoming about that, and not have that be a thing between us. And luckily it never was. But yeah, that's how we ended up together. And now 15 years and 4 trips later, and we finally have the book. Yeah, which feels like a huge accomplishment.
Microphone, just for the internet's easier.
So I imagine in these thousands of documents that there were many storylines and many different ways you could have told the story. And I haven't read the book, but I'm curious how you work together to select, and probably more difficult to edit out, and how you came to the story that you shaped, as opposed to the many different stories that you chose not to, maybe to leave out or not to tell.
There's a lot of arguing. There was a lot of arguing, but I mean, in the end, we had so many stories and so many storylines that we decided to really narrow it down to the closest family. Although there are many, many more fascinating um, stories of relatives. Some of them did make it into the book in memoriam section, but there's certainly more to tell. But I mean, that is the case with any storytelling. Eventually, as we say in the film business, you have to kill your darlings. And we had to leave something out, and that was extraordinary, painful.
I haven't read the book, but from what I've heard tonight, I have to say congratulations on a very difficult but splendid achievement by the sound of it. It looks like it's very important that all this material has been set down in a book like this. And unfortunately, I can't imagine how it could have been published earlier, given the situation of refugees, given the difficulties they face when they have to start in a new country and have to face all the difficulties that they face. But I imagine that if it was possible for this kind of book to appear much earlier than it was able to, it would have a much more devastating effect, important effect on future crises, that people would know more when the next Holocaust or genocide or atrocity comes up. And I know that it's delayed by all kinds of factors associated with refugees. I can give you the parallel of the Cambodian case, which happened in the late 70s. And I recently looked through the Amazon book page for books about the Khmer Rouge, which was Pol Pot's organization. Just put in the words Khmer Rouge, and there's been, I wouldn't say an explosion, but a vast increase in the number of telltale, of what I should say, biographical stories written by Cambodian refugees in the last 10 years or so, both in French and in English, and I would say in Khmer as well. But it's taken that long. It's taken 50 years for that number of stories to be published. And so I think you came up against the same obstacles as Cambodian survivors of the Khmer Rouge genocide did. And I just wonder if either of you think that there is any way those obstacles could have been overcome, and these stories published by refugees of their victimization and slaughter and loss of family members and difficulties of surviving as refugees could be overcome. And this kind of book could appear as, like the stories of Cambodian refugees much earlier and bring the truth to the world much earlier and perhaps much more effectively. I just got a question do you think that there was a possibility, or there is a possibility for, and what might that be?
I mean, sorry. Go ahead, Charlie. I mean, I think that the reason with the Holocaust and with some other with other genocides probably it takes time for people to process their trauma and to be able to formulate and bear witness. Charlie's family didn't speak about it at all while they were alive because they wanted to look forward and build a life. I would imagine that is the same with other refugees. Very often there isn't the headspace or the emotional space to bear witness at that point. And that's why I think sometimes it does take that long. I mean, if you think about it, there's still many more atrocities that stories need to be told, and they trickle out. So I think it's just a matter of time, and I don't know if you can speed that up. I mean, now we have the benefit of video, and maybe you can bear witness with video, but I think it just takes time for people to be able to formulate and tell their stories.
I don't know if it's true of other survivors of atrocities, but certainly I grew up in a world of silence where people, as Kat said, were just focused on trying to build a life for themselves and for next generation. So all the energy goes there, and there was a desire not to focus on the past, because the past was so painful, and also so as to protect the next generation from all this terrible stuff. That, so I don't know if that's universally true or not. I think there are some survivors who want to talk, but my family did not want to. So I think that's a crucial, and maybe since there's been so much work, I mean, to address your question, so much work on PTSD for people who've been in battle, or have survived other traumas, that maybe a door opens to survivors of atrocities to get that kind of treatment. But there has to be an investment, and refugees don't generally arrive with tons of money in their pockets, so they don't have the wherewithal to pay for such treatment. So there has to be an investment by society in in treating the victims. So that would be the first generation.
Picking up on the fact that your parents were silent about it and didn't like to discuss it. And then in the end of your mom's life, she leads you towards this armoire, into this trove of information. Looking back now that you know what happened to them, what they experienced after you and Kat had to do all of this research and finding, how do you feel about your parents' decision for not telling you? Do you think, I'm just curious how it impacted you as a child, how the silence impacted you as a child, and then learning the story, if now that you know the story, if how it changed?
Silence doesn't work. All right. Kids sense stuff. You're not told what's going on, but you do. There's something missing. So I wish they had spoken. I understand why they didn't. So I'll just tell one example. So when we got in the car, very often there would be a game that my parents would play with me, and if a friend of mine was along, the game of geography. You know how it goes. You say one word, one city or state or country. You say Norway, and then somebody has to come up with a place that starts with Y, and and that's how the game is played, and so on. And then my father would invariably stop the game at one point and say to my friends and me, well, what do you think it would be like living in Norway? What language do they speak? What happens if you had to leave? What happens if you suddenly were living there? I mean, that's a game, but no, it was more than a game. And you grow up with that, and that's just one example of small things that add up to sensing the scars that that are part of your parents and part of that generation of their friends. And another thing was something very practical, which has worked out to my benefit. My parents always said, you've got to learn languages. So that was a big thing for me, to be able to speak a bunch of languages. So why? Other kids don't grow up learning a bunch of languages. So it's
Kat, I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about your sense of guilt you said you felt because your uncle was family member was worked in the.
Could you speak up?
I'm sorry?
Could you, yeah, speak up just a bit louder. We missed parts.
Kat, could you speak a little bit more about what you talked about your feelings about your family member who was part of the Nazi party, I think. I think about Gerhard Richter's paintings of his uncle who was a Nazi and was then killed, and the photographs he took, and his feelings about that. But if you could comment on that and how that relates to the way other Germans or Austrians might think about it.
I mean, I grew up with the story, and inevitably, when in Austria, you learn about the Holocaust very intensively. I think twice within the 8 years of junior high and high school. And, eventually you go home and you ask, and I asked my mother, and obviously we talked about it a lot. And you grow up, and then when you start growing up and being a conscious person, you wonder. You wonder, is this person related to you? And what does that have to do with me? And it feels you feel guilty, particularly when, you start to have Jewish friends like I did when I went to college in New York. And you don't quite know how to sort those feelings because this is someone you've never met. But the fact that he, believed in such horrible, and followed this horrible man is you question, what does that have to do with you? So I do know that a lot of people in my generation, and also the second generation, carry a lot of guilt. Yeah, so that's a thing. I mean, in Austria, as many of you know, Germany was a lot better at owning their involvement than the Austrians were. The Austrians really only started in the 90s and 2000s. That is also something that I think my generation is actively trying to work against, for sure, and to bring it more out in the open. But again, it helped me to talk about it and be very open about my family history. It wasn't always pleasant. It certainly depends on who you're talking to. But thanks to Charlie and the book and the film that I made, I was better able to sort these feelings of guilt and responsibility.
Okay, one question right there, and then we'll get to you. Two, maybe we'll make these the last two questions.
Yes, I'm curious about whether you felt there was a sense of urgency with the work, and more broadly, it seems somewhat inevitable that there will be fewer of this type of story as the generations get further and further from people who lived through this and could connect, you to it through their own writing. Yeah,
the urgency was real, I thought it was important to get this done. And you know, time is marching on, and the immediacy of it is important. This is not something that happened in the 19th century or 18th century. It's something that happened in the lifetime of people who are still alive. And I thought it was important. It was important for me, to, as I said before, to tell the story also for other generations of my family and in general for and at a time where over the last decade, really, the story of refugees and the othering of refugees as though they are a danger. They are rather than empathizing with refugees, refugees are condemned as being unworthy. So that was the urgency that of telling this story.
I didn't read the book, so forgive me, but I'm curious to know, I don't know what age you came to America. Did you feel different as a child or however old you were to your fellow Americans? Was life different for you? Did you feel anything, you know, could you talk about your experience in America when you first got here? What was it like?
To clarify, I was born in the U.S., so I was fortunate. Yeah, the sense of being different was real. My parents spoke English very well, but one of the powerful memories for me is graduating from Yale and my parents being here and seeing my father, who had built a business, had been quite successful or somewhat successful, but he was a foreigner here. He was out of place, and he walked around but it was so clear that he was from a different culture, from a different place, and it was painful for me to see that. So and as for so that's one memory I would share. For myself, it was just a sense of, yeah, when I went home, I spoke German. My friends went home, they spoke English, and their parents knew the rules of the baseball game. My parents did not know the rules of baseball games. Little things like that. Yeah, a sense of being different and taking it a step further, also saying, well, if one is different, what can one do with that difference? How can one create something from that difference? So that's
Charlie, you went to a public school in New York, or
no, I went to to Ramaz, which is a yeshiva.
okay, yeah.
I went for 8 years, and then I went to a private school.
Yeah.
To private high school.
Okay.
So.
But not a private Jewish high school?
No.
Yeah.
No. I joined the wider community at that point.
Charlie and Kat, I think we should probably wrap this up and take advantage of the refreshments waiting for us in the room behind us. Sorry, Kat. But before we do that, I really want to thank you both for, first of all, spending this hour or so with us on a Monday afternoon or evening, as the case may be. But secondly, for spending a decade or so working on this project. I think it really is of immense value to understanding the past and understanding today, and I really value the humanity in it as a sort of overriding timelessness about that comes out of a very specific story. So thank you, and as Ben said, congratulations for writing it, but mainly thank you for writing it. And I hope it's, like I said, it's been out for 2 weeks. I hope it's well received.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Robin, and everyone who helped organize this. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you. I'm gonna have a little bit of a different part here. This is always my job. So as everybody knows, selling books these days isn't that easy, and getting the word out there isn't that easy either, especially also for historic memoir. So if you buy the book, if you love the book, recommend it to other people. That would be greatly appreciated, so we can, get some more sales. But also, if you could leave us a review on Amazon or Goodreads, that would be greatly appreciated, because that helps the algorithm, and the algorithm then gets the book higher on Amazon, and maybe more people who haven't seen us and saw how charming we are will order it.
If everybody buys a copy of the book and then goes and buys a copy of Taylor Jenkins Reid's latest book, then they'll be paired by the algorithm. That's
there you go.
My recommendation. In all seriousness, I would be remiss if I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to thank the co-sponsors of this event, not the Genocide Study Program and the Macmillan Center at Yale, but the Yale Program on Anti-Semitism, the Fortunoff Archive of Holocaust Video Testimonies, and Voices of Hope Connecticut, a West Hartford-based organization that focuses on combating hate and anti-Semitism and genocide awareness, Holocaust and genocide awareness through education. Thank you all for being here as well. And I invite you all to enjoy books and refreshments in the back room. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Kat.